Hello everyone! Today I'll be working on a scarf made with thrift store yarn and with a weft of very fluffy merino with a lunchtime visit from some turkeys. I hope you enjoy. My name is Took. I'm a disabled genderqueer weaver who's had life take odd turns, but who knows that even tattered and worn yarn still has value, and that tired joints and health flares don't have to stop the journey. I weave exclusively with secondhand fibers, aided with adaptive warping, HR and OSHA cats, and a wonderful found family. Welcome to Hawksong Weaving, where all our paths are a little bit warped. First, a bit of an explanation on why I've developed this adaptive warping method. I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which has cascaded into postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So for time's sake, know that I have joints that don't work, and if I shift positions too quickly, I get pre-syncope or pre-fainting symptoms. All of this comes with chronic pain, so for a lot of reasons, a traditional warping board doesn't work for me, along with being really expensive and taking up a lot of space in my small studio. So I use an accordion coat rack as my warping board. It's nice and neat, it contracts into a smaller space, and I can adjust it as I need to. And I don't need to be up and down and all around and having tachycardia, a racing heart, that stresses out my medical alert cat Penelope. All told, winding the warp this way took about 10 minutes. The warp is a wool blend acrylic. It didn't have a label when I got it from the thrift store, but when you work with yarn long enough, you get a feel for the wool acrylic blends versus wool versus soft acrylics. A bit of a time skip, and with the warp thread sorted, I'm lifting up the loom to release the warping board from the loom, gathering the warp threads into one large bundle and using the back of my neck to drape them over and keep them tidy and out of the way, while I collapse the warping board and get it tucked out of the way until I'm at a full pause point where I can get it unclamped from my desk. I use terry cloth towels to cushion the warp threads. This helps prevent the finished weaving from being tighter at the ends and looser in the middle, creating a sort of sausage profile in the weaving, and is a lot less finicky than the paper methods that I've seen used. Another time skip, but the way I warp has me cutting the warp loops at the end of winding the warp. This is what's easiest on my body. It won't work for everyone, but that's okay. This isn't a great angle, but I'm being careful to pay attention to how the warp threads are laying on the back bar of the loom, and the right hand thread goes through the smaller hole in the rigid heddle reed. It's not critical, and some minor mistakes aren't the end of the world, but it does make it easier to keep the tension of the warp threads even across the entire weaving. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you'd like to support my work, some free ways to do that are to like, subscribe, or follow, and share. This applies to other small artists as well. It's a great way to let the social media algorithms know that this is content worth watching. If you'd like to support me financially, there's a Buy Me a Coffee linked below, which acts as sort of a tip jar. Also, now that there are so many of you absolutely fantastic and wonderful subscribers, I've been able to link the online Hoksong weaving shop, so feel free to check out the unique handwoven products. This next bit is absolutely a joke, but just in case, in this economy, I won't say no. For $1,000 a month, you can tell me that I'm not actually disabled, I'm just lazy, and to try whatever yoga, juice cleanse, snake oil nonsense fixed your cousin. Feel free to message me and I'll get you my payment deets. I take Cash App, Venmo, and PayPal for this nonsense. Attaching the warp to the bottom apron bar is pretty easy. I finger comb it, get it separated into bits about 4 to 5 warp threads wide, separate these bits into 2 down the center, and then do a half hitch tie to the apron bar. Adding the terry cloth towel to the bottom front bar, tightening things up, cinching things as needed. I prefer to weave at a fairly high tension, but this is entirely a matter of personal preference, and you do what works for you. For the warp of this scarf, I'm using a fluffy merino that I've had for a while, but I couldn't figure out what to do with it. It's a very different gauge yarn than I usually use for a weft, but I figured that worst case scenario, I'd have a unique woven fabric for a bag, if it didn't end up working for a scarf. Once I started weaving with it, it wove up so quickly. The warp didn't end up being even squares with the bulk of the weft, but it was so fluffy and soft that I didn't care. I love working with ombre yarns. Watching the stripes stack up on top of each other is just so much fun. While I was taking a break for lunch, I noticed that the HR and OSHA lady cats of Hawksong Weaving were glued to the window, while Hades Himbo, my sweet cowardly lion, was hiding behind my goth IT partner's legs at her desk. To my surprise, there were wild turkeys in my backyard. Now, to put this in perspective, I grew up in southern Vermont, and I've never seen wild turkeys this close. And right now, I'm in an apartment building less than a block from the middle of downtown Northampton. At that point, I hadn't heard the horror stories of Boston turkeys. The lady cats were pissed, and I carefully stayed inside. Some background for me. My mother and I lived in London briefly, and during that time, I, as a 5-year-old, got attacked by a swan who was bigger than I was, and who took deep offense at us feeding the ducks. This has been compounded by experiencing truly evil chickens as a rural homeschooler, being used for farm labor in the guise of education, and a god-awful emu whose house I had to walk past to get home. I don't do large prey birds. They are awful. And they remember that they were dinosaurs, and unlike birds of prey, they have no fear, only rage. So that tossed the idea of running errands that afternoon out the door. I didn't quite join Hades in hiding behind my partner's legs, but it was a close call. Now tying off the scarf fringes, I prefer to do 2x2 warps tied into a fringe of 4, but we'll do a double sliding knot of 3 if I don't have a wide enough warp. And then unraveling the other side and doing the same thing over again with tying off the warp. Yes, I have a floor loom, but right now it's being used as an extremely expensive fabric rack. I'll get to it in time. Usually I steam block my wool blend scarves. This helps the wool fibers to soften into each other and relax into the weave. Without blocking, you can get wrinkles because the weave tends to be stiff without the added heat and water. But in this case, the contrast of the bulky weft and the thinner warp made it so that I didn't need to do that. It was soft enough and pliable enough and had a great drape all on its own. That doesn't mean I don't need to finish and trim the warp though. Once I was all set and got it all off the loom, I eyeballed the length of the fringe that I wanted and used the "don't ask me how much I spent on these good shears" and trimmed it. The final step was between half an hour and 45 minutes of tying the fringe knots. Taking breaks as needed to keep an eye on the baked good that I had in the stove. I don't remember what it was because I filmed this about a week or 2 weeks. Time is an illusion. Time is a weird soup. But I was keeping an eye on something in the stove, so this is part of why I love fiber arts, is I can just take them to whichever corner of the house I need to be in. Tying off the ends of the warp threads isn't critical, but it adds a nice finishedness to a project that I find that customers really appreciate. Thank you for coming along as I wove a fluffy merino scarf from different thrift store yarns and braved the existence of large birds. I'm so glad for the odd turn that your path took that brought you here. Thank you for spending time with me at Hawksong Weaving, where we're all a bit warped. And I hope that you have a truly excellent week.